This is big. We have learned that the Justice Department's case against former FBI Director Jim Comey and the New York Attorney General have both been dismissed. CNN's Caitlin Polantz is covering this. Caitlin, okay, what happened here? I don't know which case you want to take first.
Well, they both are being dismissed, and for essentially the same reason that Lindsay Halligan, the Eastern District of Virginia interim U.S. attorney sent there by Donald Trump, not Senate confirmed, that she doesn't have the power. What the judge here has found, this is Judge Cameron Curry from South Carolina. She came into the district, heard arguments from both of the lawyers on these cases against Lindsay Halligan's role. They argued that she didn't have the power because she wasn't Senate confirmed, and thus these indictments are invalid. The judge is agreeing with that. Judge Curry is saying that the Attorney General's attempt to install Ms. Halligan as interim U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia was invalid. And because Ms. Halligan had no lawful authority to present the indictment, James Comey's motion is granted, the indictment is dismissed. Now, the judge does mention that this is without prejudice. So in legal speak, that means that it could be brought back by another prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia if they took it through the grand jury again. But everything Lindsay Halligan did at the end of September, beginning of October, and since then, this judge is saying she couldn't have done that. She didn't have the authority. She was not confirmed by Congress, by the U.S. Senate as the Eastern District of Virginia's U.S. attorney. And thus, the president went out of his bounds, and the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, also overstepped her bounds in sending Lindsay Halligan into this district to get these indictments against both Comey and James.
And can I raise a question with Comey? I know that she had made, at least the judge pointed out, a serious error when it came to the grand jury. So what we're saying now is even that mistake that everyone had been talking about, it's moot, because essentially what I'm hearing you say is they're saying she shouldn't have been in the job in the first place.
It may be moot, yes. We still are waiting to see if Judge Nachmanoff, the presiding judge over this case, what he does. He hasn't actually entered into the record yet that the cases are dismissed. We just have this other order from the judge saying that the indictment against James should be dismissed, the indictment against Comey should be dismissed. We'll see what this other judge does now with that. But this isn't about, Audie, what you are bringing up, what Lindsay Halligan may have done with the grand jury in getting the indictment of James Comey through to the magistrate judge after they had voted down one of the charges against Comey and only secured 2 charges against him. There was that big hiccup, but it isn't what's being addressed here. This is solely about, did the Department of Justice formally take the pains it needed to get someone into the position of U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia. And this judge, Judge Curry, she says they did not. And so everything that interim U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan has done, it's invalid at this time.
Does this mean this is done? Can these charges come back?
Hadi, there are always appeals. This is at the district court level, and so it is very likely that whatever happens next will be kicking around in appeals for months, if not years.
Okay, thanks so much, Caitlin. I want to bring it to the panel now. Obviously, the administration really wanted to have the lawyers they wanted to have in place, usually people from Trump's teams in the past, to go after these figures. And I know Comey had planned in his defense to talk about vindictive prosecution. Now it didn't even get that far. How does this look? I don't know what some of the reaction here is.
I mean, it's kind of predictable in a way. Shortly after the Comey indictment landed, we saw people talk about whether Halligan was actually lawfully prosecuted. And just to be clear, this wasn't some kind of lefty legal commentator who was raising this. This was Ed Whelan of the National Review, who I think initially really raised this as an issue. So there were so many different issues with these prosecutions. It was kind of a question of which one was really going to be the one to get in the way.
Well, then let's see how the White House is taking it. CNN's Kristen Holmes is there. Kristen, what are you hearing?
Well, we're waiting to hear some kind of response here. Nothing from President Trump yet, nothing from the White House. But of course, we have reached out. But just a reminder, the White House has been heavily involved in almost all of this. Part of the reason that these charges were brought against Comey, were brought against Letitia James, was because President Trump wanted to have his political foes brought to court. And that's what we saw unfold over the last several months. We know that the U.S. Attorney who is in the Southern District of Virginia, Eric Siebert, was not willing to bring these cases. He's become becoming a problem for President Trump. He was becoming kind of a thorn in his side, and eventually he was ousted from that position. He was forced to resign. He's no longer in there. Then we saw President Trump be very involved in the appointment of Lindsey Halligan, to the point where he was posting on True Social a direct note to Attorney General Pam Bondi saying that Lindsey Halligan would be a good fit. Halligan herself had been a personal attorney, but she had never appeared before a grand jury ever before this Comey indictment. She was prepared by the FBI attorneys. That's who kind of did murder boards with her and practice rounds with her. And then she did the Comey indictment. And then almost on a whim, from what I'm told by officials, she decided she would also bring this charges against Letitia James in Alexandria just a few weeks ago, which of course then ended up in an indictment there. The White House is going to have a lot to say about this, I am certain, because they have been involved in every single step of this as it has unfolded. And this, bringing these kind of charges against President Trump's political enemies, that is something that he cares deeply about. So that is something that we expect to hear from him on.
Okay, thanks so much, Kristen. I want to come back to Caitlin Polans, who's been following the legal aspects of this. Are you getting more detail?
Yeah, Audie, I was able to read the 26 pages very quickly that Judge Curry wrote in both of these cases, James and Comey. They're essentially the same thing that she's articulating, that Lindsey Halligan, the Eastern District U.S. Attorney, placed there on an interim basis by the executive branch, that she didn't have the power to bring these. And what she is citing, the judge here, the very last thing she says in this opinion is she's invalidating the acts performed by Ms. Halligan and dismissing the indictments, returning Ms. James to the status she occupied before being indicted, which was not being an employee of the Justice Department. She was in the White House. And she cites the case U.S. v. Trump. So that is the nail in the coffin at this point in time for these two cases. The decision made by Judge Eileen Cannon in Florida last year that the case against Donald Trump related to his alleged mishandling of classified documents, that could not go forward. The judge is saying in this case that James and Comey, they cannot face these charges because the prosecutor was invalid, and she is basing that, according to this order, this 26-page order, largely upon the Trump case.
Hey, it's Scott McFarland. Since things are happening so quickly, I wanted to explain this breaking news as efficiently as possible. The cases against James Comey and Letitia James are dismissed without prejudice. Without prejudice means they can be refiled, but boy, that sure makes it look fatal to James Comey's case. We're beyond the 5-year statute of limitations, and bringing it back to the surface can be uniquely complicated. So what's the judge saying here? This is not an issue of the merits of the case. This is not an issue of those allegations of selective, vindictive political prosecution or whatever happened with the grand jury getting one indictment or the other indictment for James Comey. This is about the U.S. attorney, unlawfully appointed, the judge said. Lindsey Halligan, according to the judge's ruling, has been unlawfully serving in her role since September 22nd. The argument here from the judge is that you have 120 days to have an acting U.S. attorney. Notwithstanding that, you have to have somebody confirmed by the Senate or approved by the local district court judges. That's not the case for Lindsey Halligan. And it's uniquely devastating in the issues of James Comey and Letitia James's criminal cases, because remember, Lindsey Halligan was the only prosecutor in the room with the grand jury securing those indictments, and only her name was on the initial charging document. There's no second chair. There's no other person. It's just Lindsey Halligan. The judge noted that in the opinion today, in this 29-page opinion for James Comey and in a shorter opinion for Letitia James. The other thing worth noting here from the judge is the overall emphasis on this disregard for the law, saying, quote, the appointments clause is more than just a matter of etiquette or protocol. It is among the significant structural safeguards of the constitutional scheme. That is a rather broad statement from a judge about what's happening and what's been happening inside the Department of Justice. A lot of people would have liked to have heard the opinion from the judge on this issue of vindictive, selective political prosecution. You'll recall James Comey and his defense team made that argument last week. But these cases are toast for now on the procedural issue, the unlawful appointment of a U.S. attorney.
So, guys, this is a massive blow to Trump and his team. Obviously, the cases are dismissed, and the reason a case gets dismissed this early, even though it's brought effectively by the very top of the DOJ, I know that wasn't the chain of command used, and that's one of the reasons they got in trouble, because the prosecutor that brought it was basically declared invalid, but this very clearly was something Donald Trump wanted. So to have something like this dismissed outright is the judge basically saying that there was a technicality here, at least, that makes the case so improper, it's not even worth wasting the time of a jury, of a judge, like a trial judge, of, stenographers and all of that. It's not even worth it. In addition to the fact, guys, we've got to make it clear. In addition, there were a lot of issues raised about the grand juries, such that even if the prosecutor was appointed properly and was, allowed to do the job, that there may have been real concerns that the way they did it meant that they effectively manipulated the grand jury, or they withheld information. They basically tilted the scale of the grand jury process to get an indictment. And if that was the case, and I know I think we would need more evidence to say that definitively, but that's what the reporting really does suggest, then even with a proper prosecutor administering the case, they may have been dismissed. This is really rare to see, because usually when indictments are brought, especially federally, they're usually pretty strong. And it doesn't mean that you win every time, but federal indictments are usually pretty strong. And remember how Trump tried to get every one of the cases dismissed against him? But fundamentally, the judge would say in all of those cases against Trump, in federal, civil, and criminal cases, they basically said, sir, you're innocent until proven guilty, and you haven't been proven guilty yet. We're talking about pre his conviction. But there's enough evidence to go to trial, and a dismissal requires me basically saying there's a fundamental miscarriage that I can see right now. I couldn't then, but when you start bringing the charges, I can see that.